The slope of Mount Emberfall had always been my sanctuary. My grandfather used to say the mountain had a soul, and if you listened closely, you could hear it breathing under the earth. When I was a boy, I'd scramble up the ridges barefoot, weaving through terraces of coffee trees, my father's goats bleating in the distance, the air heavy with the scent of volcanic soil. It wasn't a quiet mountain, not really. At night you could sometimes hear faint rumbles, like a heart turning in sleep. A thin haze of smoke often coiled upward from its crown, glowing faintly when the moonlight hit just right. The villagers respected the mountain. We planted, we harvested, we lived around it, but none of us dared build on its shoulders. And then Karen arrived. She swept into town in a shiny black SUV that looked as though it had never seen mud in its life, followed by 3 other vehicles stuffed with lawyers, surveyors, and contractors. Her sunglasses were the kind with mirrored lenses that never let you see her eyes, and her smile was the kind that made you feel like you were already in her way. Karen had the kind of confidence people mistook for competence. She carried clipboards and binders as though they were scepters, and when she spoke, it was always loud enough for everyone to hear. "I've never seen land so wasted," she said the first day she stood at the base of the slope, her heels sinking into the ash-rich soil. She looked up at the mountain, squinting like she was sizing up a parcel in a suburban neighborhood. "It's dramatic. Well, let's be honest. It's perfect for luxury development," I told her then. I told her in plain words. "This land isn't wasted. It belongs to the mountain. We plant here, but the slope is unstable." She laughed in that clipped, dismissive way of hers, as though I had made a joke for her amusement. "Oh, sweetheart, you don't understand the market. Do you know how much people pay for volcano views in Hawaii? Or Tuscany? This is the future. People crave danger, as long as it looks glamorous on Instagram. We're gonna call it Volcano Chick." From that moment on, it was like the mountain had been sold off, chunk by chunk. Survey Flaris is where my grandfather once bent his back in harvest. The goats were herded away. The coffee trees were torn up by their roots. And soon, bulldozers arrived, rolling up the slope as though they owned the place, gouging the earth with steel teeth. Karen oversaw every move like a queen inspecting her court. She held HOA committee meetings under a giant white canopy at the base of the slope, complete with catered lunches, glossy pamphlets, and a scale model of what she called Model Heights Estates. Her committee, all of them equally polished, equally self-assured, nodded and applauded every word she said. "These villas will redefine luxury in the region," she declared once, stabbing a manicured finger at the model. "Infinity pools right at the edge of the slope, glass walls for panoramic views of the valley, exclusive access roads, a clubhouse with full amenities. Buyers will line up for the chance to brag about their morning coffee brewed above Volcano. And don't worry, darlings, everything will be strictly managed under HOA rules." Rules. She spoke of rules as though the mountain cared about noise ordinances or approved paint colors. Construction moved fast. By the end of the first month, concrete foundations scarred the slope. By the third, villas began to sprout, bone white structures that clashed violently against the dark volcanic earth. They rose in tiers like arrogant teeth, each one taller, sleeker, shinier than the last. Even at night, the work never stopped. Floodlights glared across the valley, drowning out the stars I used to fall asleep beneath. The hum of generators replaced the crickets. The slope, once alive with birds and goats, sounded hollow. I tried again to warn her. I caught her one afternoon inspecting the first completed villa. A 3-story Gladstone monstrosity with chrome railings and a pool that seemed to spill into the clouds. She wore a sun hat wide enough to shade a car. "You're putting people in danger," I said. "The mountain is active. The last eruption was less than 50 years ago. You can't treat it like a playground." As she turned slowly, lifting her sunglasses to look at me directly for the first time. Her eyes were blue, cold, and amused. "Darling, you're adorable when you worry. Do you know how many safety regulations we've filed? We have geological surveys, insurance policies, emergency plans. Nothing will happen. And if it does, well, that's what liability coverage is for." I stared at her, wondering how someone could look at living fire beneath the earth and reduce it to a line item in a contract. She gave me a pat on the arm, as though I were a child, then walked off to admire the way her reflection shimmered in the glass walls. By the time summer ended, the villas had multiplied. They called them volcanic villas, each one christened with a name dripping with excess. Villa Magma, Villa Pyro, Villa Cinder, and of course, Karen's personal palace Villa Lavalux. It was the largest, perched higher on the slope than all the rest, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a rooftop deck where she held weekly HOA meetings. At those meetings, her voice carried across the valley, amplified by a microphone. "We must maintain standards," she cried once, her words rolling down the mountainside like unwanted thunder. "No unauthorized decorations. No loud music after 9 p.m. No parking in front of other villas. And absolutely no alterations to exterior paint. We must preserve the aesthetic. The irony nearly choked me. Here she was, dictating the color of shutters while the earth beneath her feet simmered with molten fire. The villagers kept their distance, muttering under their breath when they passed the slope. Some shook their heads, others spat into the dirt for luck. They knew what Karen didn't. The mountain remembers. It tolerates, it waits, but it does not forgive arrogance. At night, I sat on my porch, staring at the slope now glowing with artificial light, and thought of my grandfather's words. If you listen closely, you can hear the mountain breathing. That summer, I heard it more than ever. A restless sigh under the earth, a low growl that rattled the jars on my shelves. And sometimes when the wind shifted, I could almost swear the smoke rising from the crater curled in shapes that looked like warnings. Karen didn't see warnings. She only saw dollar signs. To her, the slope wasn't alive. It was a stage, and she was the star. And when she raised her glass of champagne on the deck of Villa Lavalux, proclaiming to her guests that she had tamed the mountain, I knew she had signed a contract the mountain itself would one day enforce. ChatGPT said the first tremor rolled beneath my feet like a giant exhaling in its sleep. It wasn't violent, not the kind of quake that makes houses leap from their foundations, but a slow, heavy shift that rattled windows and made the ground feel briefly soft. I stepped out into the night, and the air was thick with ash, the kind that clings to your tongue and tastes faintly of burnt metal. Up the slope, I could see the string of villas clinging to the mountainside, their white walls shining under floodlights, their glass faces reflecting the smoke that drifted lazily from the crater above. Then came the sound, deep groan that grew into a growl. The mountain was clearing its throat. Lights blinked on across the slope, one after another, until the hillside looked like a carnival. I heard car alarms shrieking, doors slamming, voices rising. A dog barked and then yelped as though something had frightened it beyond reason. The village at the bottom of the slope was already awake. People gathering in small knots outside their houses, craning their necks toward the glowing crown. We had heard this sound before, though not at many years. We knew what it meant. Karen, however, did not. From the highest villa, Villa Lavalux, I heard her voice, sharp and commanding, cutting through the night like the crack of a whip. She was on her balcony in a white silk robe, one hand gripping a phone, the other waving frantically at her committee members scurrying below. Even from the valley I could hear her barked orders, activate the emergency protocol. Where's the insurance team? I want the fire department on the line. This is just a temporary flare-up. We're covered, people, don't panic. Her words had no weight against the next tremor. The ground shuddered again, stronger this time, and a new sound joined the growl, the tearing, splitting crack. Somewhere near Villa Cinder, the earth opened. At first it was a glowing seam no wider than my arm, glowing faintly like a coal dropped in grass. Then, with a hiss, the seam split wider, and a tongue of molten rock pushed its way into the night. The slope screamed. Trees smoldered, their trunks hissing as sap turned to steam. A hedge, imported, sculpted into neat topiary balls, burst into flame. A line of newly laid stone tiles popped and shattered like brittle bones. The infinity pool at Villa Pyro began to boil, steam billowing upward in violent white bursts. Chaos swept the villas. Families stumbled out with armfuls of luggage, tripping over each other in driveways. One man, too stunned to think, tried to load an ornamental statue of a heron into his SUV, its wings snapping off as he jammed it against the trunk. A woman in heels dragged a rolling suitcase downhill, the wheels screeching against asphalt, while her child sobbed against her hip. At the base of the slope, a volunteer crew tried to marshal people toward the main road, waving their arms and shouting. But the road was narrow, carved hastily by Karen's contractors, and already clogged with abandoned cars. Worse, the designated emergency route, an old path villagers had used for generations, had been paved no room for another row of villas. Karen had called it wasted space. Now, it was nowhere to be found. The lava moved slowly, yet its inevitability made speed meaningless. It wasn't rushing like water, but crawling forward like something alive, relentless and certain. Every inch it gained was permanent. A manicured lawn blackened. A gazebo folded inward with a groan. Someone screamed when the lava touched the edge of their deck, flames leaping skyward as wood surrendered instantly. Karen reappeared on the driveway of her villa, clutching a thick folder to her chest as if it could protect her. Even from afar I could see the corner of a clipboard jutting out, HOA notices flapping in the rising wind. She screamed into her phone, her face red with fury. Don't tell me about geological surveys. I pay ID for those. They said the mountain was dormant. I have coverage. Do you hear me? Coverage. Her SUV waited at the end of the drive, headlights glaring into the smoky night. She hurried toward it, robe dragging in ash, but the ground beneath the vehicle cracked. The front wheels sank into a pocket of earth softened by heat, and the engine howled in protest as she tried to gun it free. The car slid forward, then froze trapped like an animal in a snare. Meanwhile, the villas below her were crumbling one by one. Glass walls popped and shattered under the strain of the heat, cascading shards onto lawns where sprinklers still sprayed uselessly. Deck chairs melted into grotesque shapes. The once pristine terraces were now staircases of fire. The roar of the mountain drowned out the individual cries until they all blurred into a single, rising note of human fear. I found myself climbing a little higher, against every instinct to flee just to see. Smoke curled against my face, warm and bitter. I passed a woman who had dropped her suitcase and was now clutching only a framed photo against her chest. A boy no older than 10 stumbled past with a cat pressed under his arm, its eyes wide and glowing in the firelight. The volunteers shouted for order, but there was no order left. The lava reached the first villa's garage and swallowed it whole, the car inside exploding with a muffled thud that sent a fireball into the night. The shockwave hit Villa Lavalux's glass facade, and cracks spidered across its perfect surface. Karen froze for a moment, staring at the fractures crawling toward her like living veins. She screamed again, not in command this time, but in raw disbelief. This isn't fair. I built here. I invested. I made this place valuable. She held her clipboard high as if the papers inside could halt molten rock. The mountain answered with another violent shudder, and the glass wall behind her gave way. It imploded, shards raining inward as the roof sagged. She staggered back, arms flailing, folder spilling papers into the air. They fluttered like broken wings, catching sparks and curling into ash before they touched the ground. She stumbled toward the SUV again, her figure framed by fire and steam, but the driveway was already fractured, edges glowing red as lava licked it closer. The heat grew unbearable, pressing down like a physical weight. My throat burned with every breath, my eyes stung. Still, I couldn't look away. The villa that had once gleamed like a crown on the slope now sagged, walls from within, glass collapsing, wood igniting. Karen's white robe vanished into smoke. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw her silhouette raise one last arm in defiance. But the curtain of steam thickened, and when it cleared, there was nothing left but fire. By dawn, the slope was unrecognizable. The villas were gone, swallowed or broken or left as black skeletons. The once green terraces were of cooled rock that still glowed faintly beneath the surface. The air was still except for the hiss of steam rising from what had been infinity pools, now pits of cracked stone. The mountain was silent, not triumphant, not cruel, just silent, as though it had done nothing more than stretch in its sleep and roll over. Yet the valley below knew better. We watched covered in ash, stunned and hollow. The homes were gone, the money was gone. The rules, the meetings, the glossy brochures, burned to nothing. All that remained was the mountain, patient and eternal, and the memory of screams echoing against the slope.